Now I'm gonna level with you. This project is actually 2/3 of the way done. And I know I am so disappointed that I didn't get the first two on camera. The blouse is already done, and then the skirt is already done, and the last thing I have to do is the jacket. So that's what you guys are gonna be seeing, is my process of making a jacket for the first time. And I think the thing I'm most scared about is the sleeves. Particularly because, well, when I made that semi-Renaissance-y era, when I was replicating one of the Royal Diaries covers, that dress for Eleanor, I kind of just winged the sleeves, and I don't really have a lot of experience with that. But, you know, this is just, we're just gonna see. We're just gonna see. We are all beginners at some point, right? And so, that's what we're gonna do. Also, you can tell that I am a terrible human being because, pardon the mess, I already bought fabric for other projects that I don't really have a plan on doing anytime soon. Let's just get back into the 1890s, alright?
Following the McCall's pattern 7732, I first began by cutting out all of the pattern pieces. Now, you should note that if you plan to use a contrast fabric like I am, then you should be aware of which pieces require the contrast, because I made the mistake of cutting into the other fabric the first time around, so just be attentive. Next, I created the front folds with a bit of hand stitching. Now, I didn't realize this at the time, but I suddenly had an epiphany during this process because those are where the boobs go. I know, it's like I've never done this before. And so, I continued to follow the instructions and sewed them with an additional piece with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I tried to make both sides somewhat symmetrical, and then they ended up looking like this. Next, I pinned and sewed the back panels together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then I added the side back panels. Then it was time to pin the front and the back pieces together, right sides together, on the top and on the sides. Then I sewed them with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. To make the collar, I pinned 2 contrast pieces together, right sides facing each other, so that way I could sew them down and then flip them over and iron them flat. I also took the time to iron the other seams flat on the rest of the jacket. Also, just as a little side note, after completing this project, if I were to do this again, I would have definitely sewed it in such a way that I wouldn't have to sew it shut so much. I would have flipped it right sides out and then made it a nice finish, similar to what I did for the contrast front panels, as you will see later in this video. Now, I got confused on how the collar was supposed to be sewn onto the jacket just from the instructions alone, and I just figured that I should do a little top stitch so that way it wouldn't be shown as much, but I couldn't figure it out for the life of me. But I did sew it to the top of the back of the jacket. Next, it was time to cut out the other contrast pieces to make the flaps on the front of the jacket. Now make sure that when you do this, that you cut out 4 of them with 2 of them going the opposite direction, so that way you can actually sew them right sides together, then turn them right sides out and iron them flat. After cutting the pieces out and pinning them together, I was bombarded with a puzzlement. Now please, find entertainment in my confusion.
Alright, so this is when it starts to get confusing because it has all these extra steps on how to stitch this. But the thing is, why would I stitch it to there only to stitch it to there and then iron it and then stitch it all the way down again? I don't see the point in it. So it's flat? I think I'm just not gonna care now. I bet a lot of costume designers are screaming at me right now. But like, please don't. I think it's gonna be fine. I think it'll be fine if I just stitch it and then flip it inside out and then go about my business. So yeah.
And go about my business I did, for the next thing I did was sew them together and then turn them right sides out and iron them down. Note that I only sewed the outside edges so that way I could flip it out.
So I imagine this must be very entertaining to see just how many outfits I go through this process, just because I only have X amount of hours every day to actually record and sew and finish this project before my parents get home. So I got stumped on the directions once again, but I think at this point I'm just going to, as they say, make it work. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna finish off these edges just so it looks neat down here where this is meant to end. And that way, if I do it on this side, if I pin it on this side, I have to iron these again. But if I just sew it along that, because apparently later on in the photos, this is actually supposed to go underneath the collar, but it didn't work out like that for me, so we're just gonna see how this works. So I'm gonna try to sew it like that. I'll probably trim this end, sew along this edge up until about around that edge. And so that way, when I fold it over, you will see this fabric, but at least it'll be finished and it'll look clean. And that way, it can fold over approximately to what it's supposed to look like. Again, I've never made a jacket before. This is all very new to me, but it's my creation and I don't care if it turns out looking very shitty. So let's just get to it.
Before sewing the contrast fabric on, I pinned and hemmed the edges of the front panels so they'll have a nice finish. I know that they're meant to be covered up by the contrast fabric, but I really wanted it to look clean in case anyone did see it. Next, I pinned the contrast fabric onto the front panels, making sure that when they are folded over that they do cover the edge, and then replaced some thread, and then got to work.
Look at this! Look at this! This is bomb as fuck! I do see that it's flaring out a bit, not so much as the back, which I love the back. I'm in love. It's like I got feathers there.
After having that mini joyous occasion that all creators usually get, I continued on by hemming the bottom of the jacket. Afterwards, I began the part that I dreaded the most, the sleeves. But have no fear, for I ended up surviving, and I sewed the two pieces together, then stopped for the day.
Yeah, so the idea I had to just leave it as it is? Well, my mom came home and said that I look like one of the Munchkins from Munchkin Land, like represent. So
I decided to undo this stitching up to about like an inch past this middle part, and then I'll cut off the slack here, do the same on this side. I'm not quite sure what I'm gonna do for this part because I kind of like just tucking it in and just letting it do its thing, but I might just add a little stitch underneath here so at least it stays in place, and the same thing on the other side. But for right now, that's just what I got. And oh my god, you know what, I love the back. I love the back. Look at that back. And I also have to trim it because it's gonna like flap around if I leave it like this. So that's where I am right now, and I'm gonna take a break today because I got a hockey game. Fun fact, we won! And the next thing I did was trim the bottom of the jacket before continuing on with the sleeves. I gathered the top of the sleeves using needle and thread between the circles indicated on the pattern pieces. Then I did a crap ton of pinning, gathering, checking, and pinning again to make sure I got it right the first time. Luckily, I accomplished my goal without spilling blood, but you could imagine my shock because something bad happened.
And guess what? My camera didn't record any of that! Yay, me!
Next, I hemmed the sleeves and stitched a little bit under the collar where that contrast flap was meeting near the shoulder, and luckily the collar hid it perfectly.
Why, hello everybody. Well, it's the next day and I finally figured out why my camera wouldn't record anything. Apparently, well, this is a new camera. I'm still trying to get used to it and all that. It's a Nikon Z50, if anyone's wondering. That as soon as it hits like the 12-minute mark on how much footage left it can actually record, it automatically stops shooting. So I just had to transfer some files and now we're good. And sadly, that wasn't the only end of my tragedy, because apparently, as I was moving out of college, I lost the buttons that I planned to use on the jacket. And I had a mini panic attack last night, but that's okay. But I'm gonna go to Joann's real quick and I'm gonna get that taken care of, and hopefully they have the same style that I wanted and I bought like earlier last year. And another fun fact, it's my birthday! I am 23 now, and that's why I'm kind of dressed up a little bit. But hey, you know what? That's what we're gonna do today. And hopefully I can just sew on the buttons and then all will be well.
I had a very happy birthday because I managed to get the last of the designs that I wanted. I sewed the buttons as close to the edge as possible, starting just below where I wanted the contrast flaps to fold over. Afterwards, and now I know this isn't historically accurate, but I didn't want to use trim as the instructions suggested, so I used thin elastic for closure instead. I made temporary stitches and adjusted the loops multiple times until they fit, and then realized that those stitches were not necessary because they were doing their own thing under the machine anyway. So it was really just a trial and error kind of thing, so have that stitch remover ready. I did my best to keep the loops in place before sewing over them a couple times.
Alright, I think the reason I'm having problems with this is because of this flap right here. It's just getting in the way and it's trying to cover this up. So I'm thinking it might be better if I instead stitch the cords over this little flap. So that way, at least it'll force it to be under it, and then the red could cover it up, maybe, I hope. So I just have to try again.
And that's just what we have to do during projects like this. We try and we try until we are satisfied. And you can bet that I was much more satisfied after I ironed that skirt. Oh my god, it was bad from the move. And I have to say that I'm quite proud of how this turned out, even though it took over a year to make it due to budgeting and time management issues. Nevertheless, I hope you enjoyed witnessing my little adventure into 1890s fashion, and I hope to see you in my next sewing adventure.
Hey, so it's the next day, and you want to know what? I found the original buttons. And I realized that they're not the same size as before, but you know what? I'm happy.